Welcome, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to you for the GNI Subscriptions APAC Town Hall. My name is Sheena, and I manage the strategy and operations for the Google News Initiative in Asia Pacific, leading programs like Data and Subscription Lab. And we're hosting this town hall today to sort of go more into detail about the Subscription Lab, what it entails, and how can you participate and apply. I'm also joined here by our very esteemed colleagues here. So Brian Connolly, who is joining us from Buffalo News. He is the Vice President of Innovation and Business Development and was one of the participating publishers when we launched the lab in North America. We also have here Pete Doucette, who is from FTI Consulting, our strategic partners for the lab, and the managing director for FTI, who also led the lab in North America. And finally, Justin Eisenband, who also will say hi, is also the managing director at FTI and will be leading the program in APAC. So we launched the program a week and a half, 2 weeks ago at the WAN-IFRA Asia Media Leaders Summit. And we sort of got a set of questions. So I think this is the right time for us to be diving deep into what the lab would entail. So I would highly recommend all of you, as you go through the town hall today, to type in all your questions, think through all the queries that you have into the YouTube chat window so that we can address them later on in the call. And to just quickly go over the agenda, we'll be covering the program overview, how it has impacted partners, but also the kind of impact we're looking for working with publishers in APAC. We'll also be going through the criteria, what are some of the commitments that are required to both apply as well as go through the lab. And finally, we'll be opening up the floor for Q&A and taking questions directly from you. So without further ado, I will, when we go into the program details, I just wanted to set the context of why we are doing, or why Google is focusing on a subscription lab. The Google News Initiative, we launched it in 2018, is our initiative to bring together 15 years of commitment that we've had across our products, partnerships, and programs. And it's centered around three key areas: elevating quality journalism and strengthening and combating misinformation. Number two, how do we evolve business models, especially in a world that is now has a lot more newer realities with remote newsrooms? How do we help not just sustain advertising, but work on new business models? And then as a technology company, how do we empower newsrooms with cutting edge technology across their operations, but also their new products? The Subscription Lab is primarily focused on pillar number two, which is evolving business models. And this is definitely top of the mind for our partners in APAC as we see new paywalls launching. And so I will hand it over to Pete, who will talk about the lab itself and what it entails. Over to you, Pete.
Great, thanks, Sheena. So I'm going to just go quickly and just do a little bit of a program overview. But first, I just want to recognize the program stakeholders. So Sheena just kind of talked about the Google News Initiative and gave you some context about why they're looking to support the Subscriptions Lab in APAC. WAN-IFRA, who's a media association, who many of you know really well, is a key partner in this and helping us bring the lab to the Asia Pacific region and working with partners and kind of building out the program. And then FTI Consulting, which I work for, Justin works for. It's a global management consulting firm, and we work with a lot of news publishers around the world. So we're excited to bring this project to APAC. So those are the key stakeholders. But what I really want to do is just give you a little bit of context of the overview of the program. And so, in terms of objective, we want to bring together a group of news publishers who are really focused on building digital subscription business and help them kind of build that engine that will be a growth driver for their businesses. So that's really important when we think about it from an objective perspective. And then how do we do that? We create this lab, which is, it's an ambitious, 4-month experience where we work individually and come together. And we really think about what it takes to be good at digital subscriptions. And we address all those kind of steps on that journey. So that's kind of what the program encompasses in a nutshell. And then, so from a publisher perspective, what can they expect if they're going to participate in the subscription lab? And so, they'll get support from the FTI team and from the Google team and from WAN-IFRA, and we'll get one-on-one support to help them on this digital subscription journey. And they'll also be part of a group where they can share the successes within the kind of the lab cohort. And then also think about, all the learnings and insights, all the things that we do, work individually with publishers, but also collectively, we're trying to share learnings and best practices with the industry. So that's just a quick kind of program overview. And then when we think about, so what do you get out of the program? What are the outcomes? There's really two kind of key areas that we think about for outcomes. The first is business performance. So when you look at the results, where are you going to see results? Where are you going to see impact? The first area is around digital subscriptions in terms of revenue and growth. And then also it's going a level deeper than that, which is all the kind of the key metrics in the subscription funnel and, all the key component pieces that publishers need to be successful with digital subscriptions. So we'll go through those business performance outcomes, but equally important, I think, is around capabilities and helping publishers be successful implementing some of the recommendations that come out throughout the lab. And, part of that is a process of like test and learn and experimentation. So, focus on the outcomes, but focus just as much on the building capabilities so that you can build your digital subscription business successfully for the long run. And that's, those are kind of the key fundamentals in terms of outcomes. And then the way that we do that is through 3 key phases, and I'll just touch on them quickly. The first is what we call discovery, and that's really where, just to put into context where you are as a publisher, and where we call it a maturity curve. So how far along your journey of digital subscriptions you are. So we'll focus on that and help you kind of size the opportunity. And then we'll work with you to build kind of a roadmap, which is the plan to identify, tactics and opportunities to build and scale your reader revenue model. And then the kind of the how that all happens is that iterative process that I mentioned in terms of experimentation. So build plans, test, learn, and continue to iterate to grow. So those are the high level kind of phases that we use within the lab to kind of build towards those key outcomes. And then so now thinking about it, if I'm a publisher and I want to understand what does it mean for me to participate in the lab, these are the things that we think are really important for publishers who are in the lab to be prepared for, and this is what success looks like. So first is digital subscriptions is a strategic priority. So it's really important for you to be committed to having digital subscriptions is really an important driver for your news business going forward. So that's one. The second one is around buy-in for senior management. So you have it as a priority, and you have the support of senior management, which is really critical. And we've seen that in other work that we've done with publishers. The third one is around operationally committed to it. So that means have kind of the mechanics and the process and the things to execute on a lot of the plans and initiatives that we will do individually and collectively within the lab. And then the last one I would say, which is really important and something that we're really passionate about, is willingness to share and the insights that come out of the lab experience and share those with the broader news ecosystem. So we're trying to build case studies and best practices so that we can share with the industry to make a sizable impact on news sustainability. So that's how you can think about it as a publisher, and you can also think about it from a timeline perspective, just to kind of level set what it looks like. So it's designed to be, as Sheena mentioned, it launched about 2 weeks ago. In terms of the announcement, we're here at the town hall today. The application process is opening. Within the next few weeks, we'll do the selection, and then we'll get right into kind of building out the analysis and publisher workshops. We'll have individual meetings, group meetings, and then we'll progress into the kind of the experiment phase towards the end of the year, where we wrap up with as a lab, we wrap up collectively, and then we're looking to build what we call publisher boot camps, which are broader meetings to bring in more publishers, even those outside of the lab, to kind of share those best practices and share those learnings and insights. So that's just to help you frame it in your mind from a time perspective. And now we're going to talk a little bit about program impact and some of the things that we learned and what we saw in the North American subs lab. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Justin Eisenman, who will take you through the program impact from North America.
Thanks, Pete. So the North American Subs Lab was a lab that sponsored by GNI that began in May of last year, in 2019. And it was with 10 different publishers in North America of various sizes. So you can see them on the screen. You had Baltimore Sun, the Toronto Star, some larger publishers. You had some more in the middle size, Buffalo News, Columbus Dispatches. You also had some smaller publishers with lower overall audiences size. So we had a mix of different types of news publishers in the lab. Beginning in after May, we were with publishers, and that lab ran throughout 2019. Within just 6 months, we saw some incredible results from the publishers, and it was pretty consistent throughout all 10 of these publishers. So from a financial impact perspective, within just 6 months, we saw a $7.8 million incremental customer lifetime value per year just from digital subscriptions. That was driven both by volume and rate improvements, with 55% increase in digital subscribers year over year on average across these 10 publishers. That increase in volume of digital subscriptions actually hit the bottom line in terms of growth in average monthly consumer revenue. So 43% in terms of average monthly consumer revenue growth across the cohort of different publishers. And then in terms of velocity of new starts, we saw an increase in 59% in new monthly subscriber starts. And it wasn't just new volume coming in, it was better retention. So on average, we saw a nearly 20% improvement in retention with lower churn, subscriber churn. So really strong impact we saw mathematically, and we saw it pretty quickly. So I'm going to actually pass it back over to Pete, who's going to have a discussion with our colleague, Brian from the Buffalo News, who's going to share his experiences.
Thanks, Justin. So I want to introduce my colleague and good friend, Brian Connolly from the Buffalo News. So we thought it would be important to have an actual publisher who went through a lab share some of the learnings and insights and what that experience was like with you, so you could get a good sense of it. So Brian, why don't you say hello and just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I had the pleasure of going through the subscription lab as the Buffalo News' lead on digital subscriptions. So April of 2019, when the North American lab was announced, I was the guy filling out the application. I was the guy sort of rallying the troops in Buffalo once we got in to actually make the most out of the program. And just a little bit of background on the Buffalo News. So we're a daily news operation in Buffalo, New York, upstate New York, right on the Canadian border. And we were owned from 1977 until actually just a couple months ago. We were owned by Warren Buffett. We were a standalone property, so basically operating as an independent paper, which I would say left us with the will to understand the digital subscription business, but not the way. We were really left on our own as an independent to try to figure out really both the business objectives and the capabilities that Pete talked about. And we've had tremendous success through the subscription lab on both counts. So everything from getting the strategic focus we needed to getting some success on some tactics to actually get some immediate results, but probably most importantly, to build the capabilities that set us up, I think, for long-term success. And so, Pete and I can talk a little bit more about the specifics of how we got there. But for us, it was a huge game-changing experience for the entire organization. So we were actually sold by Warren Buffett to Lee Enterprises, a company with about 77 properties across the United States just a few months ago. Digital subscriptions are also an important part of their revenue mix. And so now we've been able to take what we learned through the subscription lab and share that with our colleagues at some major papers throughout the United States. And so those learnings are now sort of being paid forward.
Thanks, Brian. Hey, so Brian, a quick question. So, what is it like from an experience perspective to go through the lab? So, I'm sure you had some, ideas of it, when you're applying, but you don't really know what it's like. So what is it like for a publisher to go through the lab?
Well, so pre-lab, I would describe us as wandering through the darkness because we were a very print-centric organization. Our revenue was very print-centric. So we had no idea where to even begin on building a digital subscription business. And we were many months into trying to figure that out. So as soon as we began the lab, it went from us trying to figure it out on our own to having experts come in and say, here's what you need to do. And not just here's a generic playbook that you need to do, but actually sit down with us as a publisher, get to know our organization, get to know our strengths and weaknesses, have some very blunt and sometimes, hard to hear conversations about where our gaps were, and then figure out where we were going to start. At the beginning, it felt very overwhelming. We felt like, like it was, we were so far behind that maybe, the situation was hopeless. But it's a great credit really to the Google and FTI teams where I'd say that, they don't see any patient as a lost cause. And thank goodness, because for us, we were able to notch some pretty big wins in a pretty short period of time, which I'm sure was part of the secret recipe from FTI and Google. And once we saw those wins, I'll tell you that we saw a lot of people across the organization, and I'll say it again, a very print-centric organization. We saw a lot of people become believers in how this could become meaningful revenue. And you saw on the slide, you see on the slide there for us, those are percentage gains, which, as all of us working in the journalism industry can be skeptical of that. I'll tell you, it's meaningful revenue. It was meaningful enough for our publisher to go from, I would say, a little bit skeptical about where digital subscription revenue fit into the mix into a true believer. And I'll also say that we've been out of the lab for several months now. That momentum has continued. And it's because of the strategic focus that the whole organization got. We did not have that before. And it's also because of the capabilities that we built. We were able to to build it the right way, because we were listening to experts who knew how to build this business. And so we still see the returns, from the work that we did.
That's awesome and really helpful, Brian. Thanks. And so it sounds like you do a lot of, strategy work, working with the team, and, you're doing kind of that hard work that you described. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like also to work within a group of other publishers, like kind of the cohort dynamic? So the individual work versus kind of the group-based work?
So there are a couple of benefits there. One is you don't waste your time spinning wheels on things that are going to be fruitless, because the beauty of the cohort, as Justin said, it was different size publishers. It was also publishers who were at different stages of business. Yeah. We were lagging behind a lot of the other publishers, and so that was good because we had some really good peer examples that we could learn from. But at the same time, I would say even those of us who were maybe, earlier in the evolution of our business, I think we're able to maybe be a little bit more experimental. And in that sense, we were even able to help some of the publishers who are further along. One thing I would say, as an aside, is that no matter where you are, or where you think you might be, in terms of your evolution, for us, we were beginners. That, and I'm comfortable saying that. But not everybody in the lab was, and it seemed to me like everybody was getting a lot out of it. That the approach that FTI and Google takes is really to customize the work they do with each individual publisher, but then there are obviously common themes that apply to everybody. So the first, so just going back to your question, I mean, first of all, you can learn a lot from the others, whether it's how they approach building the strategy or what tactics work. But then there's also always very, very, especially, in our business where there can tend to be sometimes a lot of, doom and gloom. There's a real value in having the peer support and also the lasting network where you can reach out on a at any time on a one-to-one basis, asking people, picking their brains and tapping into their knowledge.
Awesome. So I'm also interested in hearing like how it was like operationally to be a participant in the lab in terms of like commitments and time and team. I mean, I'm sure you hadn't done this before, so you didn't fully know how to structure that. But can you talk a little bit about that? So what it's like to kind of get the most out of it in terms of like process and team and time commitments, and how you can kind of fit that into your day job?
Sure. Yeah. Well, for us, we were sort of driving the car while building it at the same time. So we knew going in, we didn't have all the resources in place, to really probably to get the most out of the program. I think by the end of the program, we were a lot closer to that. And frankly, we asked the question, of you, Pete, and Justin and the Google folks of like, well, what do we need? What people do we need? What tech do we need? And so that was helpful. But, it really, for our team, consisted of the consumer revenue folks, technology, and editorial, as well as senior leadership. I mean, our publisher was in virtually all of the meetings that we had with the subs lab, including, traveling around the country to the cohort meetings. And
there's no travel anymore, Brian.
I know. Back when there were these things called hotels that you would go to, and then you might gather in person.
But so, do you think that was important to have? Yeah.
So, well, to go back to
not the travel, the publisher involvement. Yeah.
It was huge because our publisher began as doing it, I think because he knew intellectually that digital subscriptions were important, but he didn't understand, he didn't quite see the path to it being part of long-term sustainability. And, he had an epiphany, and it actually came through on-site workshops, in particular, some of the modeling exercises that we ran through at the Google campus in Boston. And so, yeah, I mean, it wasn't, it sort of began as, okay, I need to be engaged. I get it. And then it became, we couldn't get him to focus on anything other than digital subscriptions, because he started to really understand how it was a path forward. And, sometimes that is hard for people who are so close to the financials and the day-to-day, and also been in the industry so long, tough to see. So that was huge. But I would just say we also made a big deal of this to the whole organization. Everybody, when we were having our meetings with everybody from production, circulation, people who in very print-centric departments, we were explaining to them that we were in this lab, what the lab was all about, and then giving them updates. We meet as a company on a regular basis, and every one of those meetings included some form of an update on our digital subscription progress and the connection to the lab. The last thing I'll say is just for our organization, knowing that we were working with Google, somebody who obviously everybody understands, they know what they're doing in this space. We're legacy, they aren't, and there's a lot that we can learn there. That was huge. That was a huge lift to everyone's psyche, and there was a tremendous level of trust there. Trust that in my opinion was totally, born out to be for Google to be worthy of, because they were tremendous partners.
That's great to hear. And I guess the last question, Brian, is, I'm looking at the screen, I'm looking at the numbers, a lot of tremendous growth across all these different component pieces. Like, I guess, can you describe how it went from, like, you talk about the strategy and the roadmap and things like that, but then it translates into real tactical improvements? And you said, I think you described them as material or meaningful. So, like, how does it go from, like, the 25,000 foot level to the 5,000 foot level? Like, how does that all work together?
Well, one of my favorite examples is our email newsletter program. So we had launched the editorial daily, headlines newsletter, very common tactic for getting people to the top of the funnel, as well as engaging subscribers. Mm-hmm. And we had launched it using an old list from a previous effort at newsletters, and was around, launched at maybe like 10,000 subscribers. And we promoted the heck out of it, and we ran TV ads and radio ads, and we did, house ads in the paper, promo ads, and we maybe got it up to like 12,000 from 10,000. And then we started, and that was over the course of many, many months. Then we started the subscription lab, and just a very simple tactic of doing a modal. So the first time people visit buffalonews.com, our main website, they get the modal asking, do they want to sign up? And our signups went through the roof. And that list is now approaching 90,000 subscribers. It's a very healthy list. Our open rate has actually gone up as the list has gotten bigger, and is our number 2, conversion source after the paywall itself. So everyone talks about the paywall. What are you doing with your paywall? What's your number at? All that, very important. That's all discussed throughout the program. Newsletters are for us just as effective. I'll also say, because I'd be remiss if I didn't, that ARPU, so what we're actually asking people to pay us. We went through price increases during the program. We were already planning on doing price increases, and so we tapped into the knowledge of FTI and Google for advice on how to handle price increases. We ended up being much more aggressive on our digital pricing than we would have been otherwise, and that aggressiveness was rewarded with very high retention rates. And we now, we now look at an ARPU that we're very, very, very proud of. We were fearful, what's going to happen when you do some of the price increases that we did, but we put out a good product, and the expertise of FTI and Google said, trust that your product is worth it, and that people will pay for it, and they have. And in terms of like overall revenue, Justin alluded to this, we've seen great volume growth, but at the same time, our retention's gotten better, and really important, our ARPU is much higher. And so now you put those 3 things together, and that's where all of a sudden it adds up to really meaningful revenue.
Yeah. So ARPU, average revenue per user, critical lever. And so you talked a little bit, you kind of got the confidence through the program to be experimental there and to, figure out how to drive revenue, both volume and rate. So I think that's important. So I just was looking at the numbers here. I think we talked about most of them, except can you just talk a little bit about subscriber penetration and what that means, just so folks understand?
Sure. So of our overall audience, how many of them are subscribers? So it's I think looking at, it's one of many conversion metrics that we're looking at, and we were one of the real basic things that we learned very early on, frankly before we even had our first session with in the subs lab, just when we had the data request, is are we looking at the metrics that we should be looking at?
Right.
And so before you start hiring people or investing in marketing technologies or anything like that, you have to have some goals beyond make more money or get more subscribers. What are the other, what are all the numbers, all the metrics that you can try to move that lead up to those top level metrics?
Right.
So subscriber penetration would be an example of that. The meter stop rate or the paid stop conversion rate. Right? These are all things that are all going to help inform some of the decisions that get talked about a lot. Like how many stories on the meter before you force people to hit the paywall.
Yeah. No. So I think it's important, to your point, is to understand like what you're solving for, what you're tracking, and what metrics you want to influence. So awesome. Brian, thanks for walking through the Buffalo News story with us. It was really helpful. I think what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the Q&A session for the group. So I'm going to flip it back to Sheena, and she's going to go ahead and lead us through the Q&A.
Thanks, Pete. And Brian, once again, thank you so much for sharing such valuable insights from your experience and also potential challenges that one can face. So we're getting a couple of questions already on the live chat. I'll also encourage our viewers to go through the chat and pen their questions down there. So we'll just take from the top. The first question is from Utsa Kohli, who's writing in to say we're a bespoke Indian digital-only news organization who started a voluntary subscription process and wanted to know if we would be eligible for this. Pete, would you like to take that?
Sure. And so, yeah, I think just so make sure I understand it. So you're asking people voluntarily to subscribe versus, putting up a paywall. I think what the requirement we have is that a publisher have a digital subscription business in place, which clearly you do. And I think we think about it kind of on the maturity curve that we're talking about with Brian. So you might be kind of in the early stages of that. So so I think it would be great for you to go ahead and apply, because we could work with you to move you from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. So it's a great question.
Thank you, Pete. The second question is from Brian from Temper Media Group in Indonesia. And the question is, did the GNI Lab build your subscription system as well? I can take that one. As Brian mentioned earlier, to Brian, that we did do an assessment of what the technical infrastructure is or what are the resources required, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we actually helped put technology in place or help you make those decisions as well. We are hoping that you already have a subscription paywall in place. And once that is done, we can do a review and give you recommendations, but not actually help you implement the system. So anything, Pete or Justin, if you'd like to add. And sorry, the question was from Handy, not from Brian.
Yeah, we have lots of instances where, we had technology gaps or shortcomings, and there was a lot of guidance on how to fill those gaps, and that comes from within the cohort, because you can talk to other publishers about, okay, how, what platform have you used, for paywall, for email newsletter, for your marketing technologies, for your data warehouse, all those things. And we were at the stage where we were building out, we were starting from scratch with some of that technology. So while the lab will not build it for you, I can tell you that it's going to save you a lot of time and probably help you avoid mistakes in those really key decisions.
Thanks, Brian. I think you are definitely our most most wanted guest here. So the next question is also for you, from Astro Avani in Malaysia. They're asking, could you elaborate on meaningful digital business that you mentioned? Sure.
So for us, when we began the lab, digital subscriptions were a six-figure business for us, and they've quickly became a seven-figure business and are growing, at a really high rate. What that meant organizationally is, when we looked at, our four main revenue buckets as being print circulation, print advertising, and digital circulation, they probably went in that order. And I would say we ended the program with digital circulation being the number one priority because of the promise that we had seen from that. Now that, frankly, ownership change can change that somewhat. It doesn't make it it just changes the priority, but it doesn't make it any less of a strategic focus for us. And actually, I think I alluded to this maybe a little bit, but as we've gone from being an independent to being part of a much larger company, I think that we have been able to share what we've learned in the lab, because digital subscriptions are a priority for everybody in our business right now. It's just a matter of where each publisher is at understanding, sort of 1, 2, 3, 4 might be different, but it's a priority for everyone.
Awesome. So the next question, I'll just switch over because it's asking about the scope of the program itself. It's from Commonwealth Media, our magazine from Taiwan, and they're asking, how are we adapting the program from North America to APAC? Pete, do you want to take that?
I'm going to flip that to my colleague, Justin, because he's well-versed and ready to handle that one.
Thanks, Pete. Sure. So, a lot of the strategies and tactics that we walked, Brian and the other publishers through in North America are applicable in terms of, benchmarking and gathering the same types of statistics and benchmarking data points of walking your audience through the consumer funnel. However, we're also doing local market specific research for each one of the countries that publishers are participating in. So understanding how payment models may differ from country to country, or how mobile heavy certain markets might be versus others. So there are certain market specific factors that we're going to research and provide as part of the lab to help influence those strategies and recommendations that we're going to come back with.
Thanks, Justin. One more question on which is to do with the application as well, but we can take that one first. Brian, for you mentioned that Utsa is asking if you mentioned that your subscribers went up from 10,000 to 90,000. How much time? What was the time period for it? And were these signups?
Right. So I should clarify. Those are newsletter subscribers. So some of those are also paid subscribers, and that certainly helps on engagement and retention. The majority of them are not. They are coming to our website, and they are they might be flyby, they might be regular visitors who are not subscribers. But by getting them onto our email newsletter list, we engage with them 7 days a week, with a 6 a.m. Digest of all the day's news. It skews heavily toward pointing to our content, which obviously drives them to our site. They'll then experience the paywall sooner. But I should say it doesn't exclusively point to our site. The idea was build a product that was sort of the go-to source for news in our region. And that was, started as a controversial thing internally, but it turns out to have worked really well as a conversion tool. So anyway, that growth, I will say most of that growth happened within the first probably 3 or 4 months of putting up the modal, but we've continued to see really strong growth from that list. We've actually spun that growth off into other newsletters. So that's our flagship morning newsletter, but we have a couple dozen newsletters. When we launched a newsletter right at the onset of COVID-19, we seeded it using that list. And we actually saw that COVID list. Most people who were getting our morning newsletter wanted that COVID newsletter. They did not opt out. And then we actually saw that COVID list leapfrog our morning headlines newsletter in terms of subscribers. And I don't think it's a coincidence that during that same time frame, we've experienced our best month on paid digital subscription acquisitions ever, by a lot. And yes, that first started during the early days of COVID, but we've seen that growth continue even as there are reports of news fatigue or a leveling off. We've continued to see really strong growth. The newsletters are a huge contributing factor to that. Our newsletter program went from stuck in the mud to overdrive during the digital subscription lab, for sure.
Thanks, Brian. And I'm going to lean on you for the next question as well. That's from Handy. And they're asking, are you retargeting your visitors from the web to be a subscriber using ads?
No, but that's a tactic I would heartily endorse. And I will say, I mean, with our move into being part of Lee Enterprises, they bring a lot of skills we didn't have, and a lot of tactical know-how we don't have, and I think that includes doing some more retargeting. But just being honest, we were really focused on acquisitions through the paywall, and then by the end of the program through our email campaigns. We did some paid social. We did not do much retargeting. I think it's a great opportunity, though.
Awesome. So just shifting gears once again towards the program scope, Pete, both these questions actually are asking complementary things. The first one is from Hong, saying that we plan to launch a subscription model, but can we still apply, and how will we fill in the information in section 2? And the second one from Sandeep, who's asking, is there a minimum period of paywall that would be preferable for this program? So Pete.
Yeah, sure. So I think on the first one, we are asking publishers to have an existing digital subscription model in place. So because we think that's important, because you're already at, I guess, one point in the maturity curve, and you're able to kind of participate within the lab, in the cohort, and share practices and learnings within that. And then in terms of the point about how long you have it in place, there is no magic number. Clearly, recognizing that for some publishers it's still relatively nascent, so the period would be relatively short. For some, they may have been at this 2 or 3 years. When we did the North American lab, I think the shortest one we had was about 9 months. Had launched in 9 months, and the longest one was probably about 7 or 8 years. So it varies. And what I would say is all publishers, and I think Brian made this point earlier, kind of regardless of where they are on the maturity curve, can participate and learn and get a lot out of the program. So So there's no magic in terms of duration, but it's just you got to take that step forward and be on that path of digital subscription.
And if I could add one more thing to that, we are very, very cognizant of the fact that, a lot of the APAC publishers who are today viewing as well are pretty early on in their journey for subscriptions. So I would just encourage you to apply. And as soon as you get the application, it gives us more sort of space to understand where you are at. And if we have follow-up questions, we can take it from there. So first, please do apply. As we're coming into closing our Q&A session, so I'll give the folks viewing this call today some more time to sort of think through the questions, but we did receive a lot of FAQs through the application process as well. So, and one of the common ones that we received was concerns around sharing of data and what it would entail from the usage of data for the lab's purposes. So I think that would be a good one to tackle, Pete. Am I required to share data as part of the lab, and what does it actually entail?
Sure. So yeah, we do a process which is called a data request. So we ask publishers to kind of fill out some data so we can get some background data in terms of performance and subscription metrics, et cetera. And so I think it's important to understand that the data is provided from the publisher to FTI. And we house your data securely. And so there's a direct relationship between the publisher and FTI. And so what I would say is we don't share any of your data we don't share any of your data without your explicit permission. When we do some benchmarking across the key metrics within the lab, it's good to see, it's good for you and good for others to see kind of where they are on a relative basis. And so we encourage publishers to share certain metrics so that we can benchmark them. Not like confidential metrics, but like subscription related metrics. And so, in the North American lab, we started that benchmarking process doing it anonymized. So we would do the benchmarking, but you wouldn't know which publisher was which. And then over time, as the confidence kind of grew in the program, and the comfort level of publishers, they ended up unanonymizing it, so everyone kind of knew where they stood. So it's a long-winded answer to say, yes, sharing data is an important part. You get the most out of it, but your data is secure, and then we can use that data to help tell the story both of you and the publishers at large. So it's an important part, and we have a very rigorous process to keep your data safe.
Thanks, Pete. We do have an additional question on the chat window from Utsa again, and he's asking if there's a certain investment commitment that we need to do for this program to actually see the results. Either Pete or Justin, would you like to take that question?
Justin, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of investment commitment from a dollar perspective, absolutely not. But in terms of investment from a time commitment, certainly, from a data request standpoint, most of what we ask, we'll try to make it as easy as possible to walk you through the data request and make it easy to fill those out. And then, additionally, we'll have a few different individual one-on-one meetings with you where we'll go through your data and your strategies to help develop your individualized roadmap. And we'll also have cohort meetings where we'd ask, that you participate, and those will be about 2 to 4 hour sessions, depending on what type of session, whether an individualized or cohort group session. So certainly a time commitment, once a week or once every other week in terms of meetings, as well as a time commitment to provide the data. And but we work through with you carefully to try to ease that burden in terms of providing information to us.
Thanks, Justin. And I think as we start to close things off, I think this was a a very common question from our applicants as well, was whether the program's instruction is going to be in English and what is the recommended team composition for participation. So Pete, it'd be great if you could cover that.
Sure. So in terms of the first one, I think for the program, you know, a lot of the meetings will be held in English. So so publishers that have you know, business English as a business language, I think it was important, is an important piece. So so that you can you know, participate in all the different sessions. I think we're also looking at possibly a native language lab where we have a group of publishers with the same language so that they can share. So we're also trying to find ways, both working individually with the publishers, but also with the cohort, so they can kind of share back and forth. So that's part of the rationale on why we're, you know, a lot of the program will be done in English. And then the second question around recommended team is one we've certainly got a lot, and it's a hard one to answer because all publishers are a little bit different. And so, you know, I think in our FAQs, we have some like guidelines of, you know, there's a person who's in charge of, you know, subscriptions, like marketing. I know Brian had mentioned, like, you know, from tech and newsroom. And so I don't know if there is an ideal team structure, but you do need a bit of a cross-functional team of all the groups that kind of touch digital subscriptions in a way. So I think about it from, you know, almost like from a responsibility or capabilities perspective. So if you think about all the components of subscriptions and what goes into that, and then within your organization, what does that look like? And we can help you to structure that. So that, I mean, we have some like initial guidelines, but what I would say is when it goes through the process, we can help you figure out what the best team looks like. So I wouldn't think about that as a barrier, but just something to kind of work through in the process.
Awesome. And with that, I'd like to conclude our town hall today. Thank you so much to our viewers who are joining us, but mostly thank you to the three panelists who are dialing in at 2 a.m. from the United States. So thank you, Pete, Brian, and Justin. And Brian, especially for all the insights that you brought to us in the region. I think it's really, really helpful. For the viewers, we will be sending this video out to you if you have signed up for our mailing list, but it will also be available at this link. I would highly encourage, while I know journalists are very keen on applying right at the dot before deadline, I'd really encourage you to get on with the applications as soon as possible. So if there are any follow-up questions, we can help answer that. You can take a picture of the QR code on the screen, or there is a link for applying in the description for this video. Once again, thank you so much. There are numerous spots, so I'll also encourage you to share this with folks in other businesses if you think they're the right applicant. And once again, have a great week, and we look forward to your applications.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.